Take your ring off. Now, my fiancé. Leo didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes were fixed on the front door of my parents' house, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I looked down at the diamond on my finger, the one he'd placed there just 2 days ago on a windswept cliffside, and my heart seized. What? Why? He finally turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically grim. Nikki, please, just for tonight, don't ask questions yet, just trust me. The request felt like a slap. This was supposed to be our triumphant moment, the happy announcement we had been bubbling with excitement to share. Hiding the ring felt deceptive, shameful even. But the look in his eyes, a deep and serious plea I had never seen before, stopped my protest. And it saved us. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. I slid the ring off my finger, the cool metal, a phantom weight against my skin, as I dropped it into the side pocket of my purse. The gesture felt wrong, a betrayal of the promise Leo and I had just made to each other. I don't understand, I whispered, the festive mood we'd cultivated all afternoon evaporating into the stale air of the car. Leo reached over and took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. You will, he said, and the certainty in his voice was the only thing that kept me from putting the ring right back on. Tonight, just watch them, listen to them. See what happens when they think there's nothing for them to gain. The words were cryptic and unsettling, planting a seed of dread in the pit of my stomach. We walked to the door of my childhood home, a place that was supposed to represent comfort but had always felt more like a stage where I played a part I never auditioned for. My mum, Sarah, opened the door with a smile that was a little too wide, a little too bright. There you are. We were getting worried. My sister, Mara, drifted into the hallway behind her, phone in hand, her expression one of polite boredom. My dad, Tom, called a muted hello from the living room, his attention already tethered to the television. The performance had begun. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken expectations. After a few minutes of painful small talk about the weather and traffic, I couldn't stand it anymore. I took a deep breath, Leo's hand finding mine under the table. We have some news, I announced. Leo and I are engaged. For a moment there was silence. My mother's smile flickered, the wattage dimming slightly. Oh, she said. Well, that's sudden. My dad grunted from his armchair. Weddings are expensive, you know. It was Mara who went for the kill, her eyes scanning my left hand with predatory focus. Engaged? Really? So where's the ring? Don't tell me he proposed without a ring. How embarrassing. The question hung in the air, exactly as Leo must have known it would. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. It's being resized. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a little too big. The disappointment in the room was a physical thing. My mother's posture deflated. Mara scoffed and looked back at her phone. My father changed the channel. The grand announcement had landed with all the impact of a wet sponge. Their interest, it seemed, wasn't in my happiness or my future with the man I loved. Their interest was in the spectacle, the status, the material proof. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. The conversation revolved entirely around Mara's promotion at her marketing job, the new car she was planning to buy, and my mother's detailed complaints about the rising cost of groceries. I was a ghost at my own celebration. Leo remained silent, a watchful presence by my side, his gaze moving from my mother to my sister to my father like a spectator at a tennis match, tracking the volley of veiled insults and self-absorbed monologues. Every word, every glance, confirmed the wisdom of his strange request in the car. He was showing me something I had refused to see for my entire life. He was showing me the truth of my family's love. It was entirely transactional. My family dynamic was a carefully constructed ecosystem designed for one purpose, to support and enable Mara. She was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting her, our paths dictated by her gravitational pull. I wasn't just the older sister. I was the designated crisis manager, the unpaid therapist, and the emergency fund. From a young age, the roles were set in stone. When Mara scraped her knee, my mother would rush to her side while telling me to be the strong one and fetch the first aid kit. When Mara failed a test, My parents would blame the teacher and hire her a tutor, paying for it with the money I had saved up from my part-time job, promising to pay me back. A promise that dissolved as soon as it was spoken. My successes were treated as expected background noise. I got a scholarship to college, and my dad's response was, "Well, that's good. Saves us some money we can use for Mara's art classes." When I graduated with honors, my mother's first comment was a worried sigh. "I hope you don't make Mara feel bad about still being in community college." It was like boiling a frog. I never noticed the water heating up until I was already cooked. Every concession, every sacrifice was framed as my duty, as the responsible one. "Nikki, you're so good with money. Could you just help Mara with her car payment this month?" "Nikki, you're so stable. Mara really needs a place to stay for a few weeks. It'll just be until she gets on her feet." A few weeks turned into 6 months, during which she treated my apartment like a hotel, leaving a trail of dirty dishes and unpaid bills in her wake. When I finally asked her to contribute, my mother called me, her voice dripping with disappointment. "I'm surprised at you, Nikki. Family helps family." "You're being so selfish." The gaslighting was constant and suffocating. My feelings were always dismissed as an overreaction. "You're being too dramatic. You're too sensitive. It wasn't that big of a deal." They were masters of rewriting history, of twisting events until I was the unreasonable one, the difficult one, the one who was tearing the family apart simply by asking for the same respect and consideration they showered on Mara. I became the designated driver at a demolition derby, expected to stay sober and responsible while everyone else crashed around me and then get blamed for the dents. Leo was the first person who saw it clearly. When we first started dating, he was baffled by the constant, one-sided demands. He'd watch me answer a frantic call from my mother, then spend the rest of the evening wiring money or cancelling our plans to go fix a problem Mara had created. He never judged, he just watched, his calm presence a mirror reflecting the absurdity of it all. "It's not normal, you know," he said gently one night, after I'd spent 2 hours on the phone trying to convince my parents not to co-sign a loan for another one of Mara's doomed business ideas. "The way they rely on you for everything but give you nothing in return. It's not family, it's a support system. And you're the only pillar holding it all up." His words were a quiet bomb, detonating years of carefully constructed denial. I had always told myself this was just how families were, that my sacrifices were acts of love, but hearing him say it, seeing the dynamic through his clear eyes, I realized it wasn't love. It was exploitation dressed up in a family photo. The story of my grandmother's ring was the defining myth of my childhood, a symbol of a special bond that my family could never quite touch. My grandmother, Eleanor, was my sanctuary. She was a woman of quiet strength and mischievous humor, and her home was the only place I ever felt truly seen. While my parents were caught up in the whirlwind of Mara's latest drama, Grandma Eleanor and I would spend hours in her garden, her stories of the past weaving a tapestry of a life lived with grace and resilience. The ring was her most treasured possession. It was an Art Deco piece, a stunning sapphire surrounded by a delicate filigree of small diamonds, set in platinum. It had been her mother's, and it held generations of love within its cool metal. She would let me try it on, the heavy ring sliding over my small finger, a piece of adult magic. "One day, this will be yours, Nikki," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "You have an old soul, just like your great-grandmother. You'll understand how to take care of it." It was our secret, our promise. She told me she had put it in writing, a specific clause in her will, ensuring it would pass directly to me. It wasn't about the monetary value, it was about the legacy, the tangible link to the one person who saw my worth without qualification. When she passed away, the grief was a physical ache. But underneath the sorrow was the quiet anticipation of fulfilling our promise. I was 18, and the ring felt like a final gift, a piece of her to carry with me into adulthood. Then came the phone call from my mother. She was cleaning out the house, she said, her voice thick with a theatrical sorrow that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Nikki, honey, I have terrible news. I can't find the ring. I've looked everywhere. It's just gone." I didn't believe her, not for a second. An instinct, cold and sharp, told me she was lying. But how could I prove it? I was an 18-year-old girl against a seasoned manipulator. I rushed over to the house, frantically searching through jewelry boxes and dusty drawers, my mother hovering over me with a pained expression. "I told you, sweetie, it's not here. Someone must have taken it during the funeral. There were so many people coming in and out." She had an answer for everything. She even feigned outrage, threatening to call the police, a threat that never materialized. The will, it turned out, was useless. My grandmother had indeed specified the ring was for me, but the will also stated that if an item could not be found, it was simply considered lost. There was no recourse. My mother had found the perfect loophole. The loss of the ring was devastating, far more than the loss of a piece of jewelry. It was the theft of a memory, the severing of a connection. It became another brick in the wall of my resentment, a silent testament to my mother's casual cruelty and my sister's protected status. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Mara was somehow involved. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. Over the years, the lost ring became a family tragedy that my mother would bring up whenever she wanted to appear sentimental, a story she told with a sad shake of her head. And I would sit there, silent, the truth a burning coal in my throat. Back at the dinner table, the atmosphere was thick enough to carve. My lie about the ring being resized had sucked all the air out of the room. Mara, having recovered from her initial disappointment, had now shifted into a mode of subtle interrogation. "So, if it's being resized, you must have a picture of it, right? I mean, who gets engaged and doesn't take a million pictures?" She leaned forward, her smile a sickly sweet challenge. Leo squeezed my hand again, a silent signal to stay the course. We were too caught up in the moment, I said, forcing a casual shrug. We just wanted to enjoy it for ourselves before blasting it all over social media. This was, of course, the opposite of everything my sister stood for. Her life was a carefully curated feed of posed moments and filtered reality. My answer seemed to offend her on a spiritual level. "That's weird," she declared. "It's like it's not even real if you don't post it." My mother chimed in, her tone one of deep concern. "Nikki, honey, you have to be careful. A man who proposes without a proper ring, it can be a red flag. Are you sure you're not rushing into this?" The irony was breathtaking. She was questioning the integrity of the kindest, most honorable man I had ever met, a man who had seen through her charade in a matter of months, a feat that had taken me nearly 3 decades to even attempt. "I'm sure, Mom," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. My dad, sensing the rising tension, decided to contribute his unique brand of patriarchal wisdom. "Well, as long as he can provide for you, I suppose. What do you do for a living again, Leo?" Leo, who had been listening with the patient stillness of a wildlife photographer, finally spoke. "I'm a software engineer, Tom." "Ah, computers," my dad said, as if that explained everything and nothing at all. "Good money in that, I hear." The conversation was a grotesque parody of a family celebrating an engagement. It was a financial audit, a social media strategy session, an episode of a courtroom drama where my happiness was on trial and the jury was hopelessly biased. Every question, every comment was a probe, a test designed to extract information they could use. How much is Leo worth? What can we get out of this? How does Nikki's good fortune benefit us? The lack of a ring had clearly thrown them off their game. It was the missing piece of their puzzle. Without it, they couldn't assess the value of the acquisition. They couldn't gauge the level of financial success Leo represented, and therefore they couldn't calculate their potential share of the spoils. I watched them, really watched them, for the first time without the filter of hope or filial duty. I saw the greed flickering in my sister's eyes, the cold calculation behind my mother's concerned façade, the dismissive indifference of my father. These were not people celebrating my joy. These were stakeholders evaluating an asset. The meal ended, and the relief was immediate. As we stood to leave, my mother hugged me, her embrace feeling cold and brittle. "You'll show us the ring as soon as you get it back, won't you, sweetie?" she whispered, her voice laced with an insistence that bordered on a threat. "We're all just dying to see it." I nodded, a silent promise that I knew, even then, I would keep. Oh, she would see the ring. They all would, but it wouldn't be in the way they expected. The silence in the car on the way home was a living thing, heavy and charged. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, my mind replaying the disaster of a dinner. The anger I felt was a confusing cocktail, directed at my family for their transparent avarice, but also at Leo for putting me in that humiliating position. I was the one who had to lie and deflect, who had to sit there bare-handed while my family passed judgment. "I don't think that could have gone any worse," I said finally, my voice tight. "No," Leo said, his tone even. "I think it went exactly as it should have." I turned to face him, my frustration bubbling over. "What does that even mean?" "They think you're cheap, that you proposed without a ring." Mara practically called our engagement fake. It was horrible. He pulled the car over to the curb, turning off the engine. In the sudden quiet, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Nikki, I didn't want to do this before. I wanted you to see it for yourself first. I wanted you to see their reaction when there was nothing on the table for them." He navigated to his photo gallery and handed the phone to me. The screen showed a screenshot of a social media post. It was a picture of Mara, taken a few years ago. She was in a club, laughing with a group of friends, a cocktail in her hand. And on the ring finger of that hand, sparkling under the dim club lights, was my grandmother's ring. The air left my lungs in a single, painful gasp. I zoomed in, my thumb trembling. There was no mistaking it. The Art Deco setting, the deep blue of the sapphire, the intricate platinum filigree. It was the ring, my ring. The caption on the post was a jaunty, carefree line, "Vegas baby, big wins all around." The post was dated 3 years ago, about 2 months before Mara had miraculously come up with the down payment for a brand new car, a feat she had attributed to her incredible budgeting skills. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my throat raw. My cousin, a friend of a friend of a friend, was there that night and thought she recognized the ring from a story I'd told him about you. He grabbed a screenshot before Mara deleted it a few days later. He sent it to me last week when I told him I was proposing. He thought I should know. I stared at the image, a mosaic of lies clicking into place. My mother's feigned sorrow. Her story about it being stolen, Mara's sudden windfall of cash. They hadn't just lied to me, they had conspired. They had stolen a piece of my history, a piece of my heart, and pawned it for a depreciating asset. My mother had given the ring that was my birthright to the golden child, who had then sold it without a second thought, likely for a fraction of its worth, to fund a trip to Las Vegas. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly cold-blooded, that it momentarily paralyzed me. It wasn't just about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about the complete and utter disregard for my feelings, for my grandmother's memory, for the basic tenets of familial trust. Leo's actions in the car suddenly made perfect, painful sense. He hadn't been trying to humiliate me. He had been trying to protect me. He had orchestrated a test, a brilliant, simple test to expose their true nature. By removing the ring from the equation, he had forced them to react to the news of my engagement on its own merits. And they had failed spectacularly, revealing that without a tangible prize, my happiness was worthless to them. I handed the phone back to him, a cold, hard anger beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. The years of quiet suffering, of being the family shock absorber, were over. The frog was finally climbing out of the pot. The drive back to our apartment was a blur. My mind was a maelstrom of shock, grief, and a white-hot rage that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the anger of 1,000 tiny cuts, a lifetime of being sidelined and undervalued, finally coalescing into a single, sharp point. The image of Mara wearing my ring, flaunting it in a blurry nightclub photo, was burned into my retinas. Each detail of the past few years replayed in my head, now cast in a sinister new light. The way my mother would steer conversations away from my grandmother whenever I brought her up, Mara's sudden, unexplained affluence. The little smirks and shared glances between them that I had always dismissed as paranoia. It was all real. I had been living in a house of cards, and Leo had just gently blown on it, revealing the hollow space where a foundation should have been. When we got back to our apartment, I walked straight to the small wooden box on my dresser, where I kept my most precious mementos. I pulled out the few remaining photographs I had of my grandmother. In one, she was a young woman, her hand resting on my grandfather's shoulder, the ring clear and bright on her finger. In another, she was holding me as a baby, her hand with its familiar sapphire sparkle resting on my back. These were the only pieces of her I had left, and my family had tried to steal even the memory of that ring, replacing it with a cheap, fabricated story of loss. The scope of their deception was staggering. It required a level of callousness I hadn't thought my mother capable of. To lie to her own daughter about her mother's dying wish was one thing. To be an accomplice in the theft and sale of a family heirloom for something as trivial as a car was another. It was a complete moral failure, a betrayal on a cellular level. I sank onto the bed, the photographs clutched in my hand. Leo came and sat beside me, not saying a word, just offering his solid, comforting presence. He understood that I needed to process the implosion of my entire family history on my own terms. "She gave it to her," I said, the words feeling alien in my own mouth. "My mum. She took it from me, and she gave it to Mara, and Mara sold it." Saying it out loud made it real, solidifying the betrayal from a sickening suspicion into an undeniable fact. "What did she buy with it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The car," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "She sold our great-grandmother's legacy to buy a ridiculous SUV that she probably can't even afford the insurance on." I looked at Leo, the anger in my eyes now hardening into resolve. "They're not going to get away with this. I'm not going to let them." For my entire life I had kept the peace. I had absorbed the insults, paid the bills, cleaned up the messes, all to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy family. I had swallowed my own needs, my own anger, my own identity, to make things easier for them. That person, the old Nikki, had died in the car on the way home. The woman sitting on the bed now was someone new, someone forged in the fire of this ultimate betrayal. She was no longer interested in keeping the peace, she was interested in justice. The next morning, the fog of shock had burned away, leaving behind a landscape of cold, clear fury. The path forward was no longer murky with confusion or self-doubt. It was a straight, narrow road leading to a confrontation they would never forget. I was done being the family's emotional janitor. It was time to hand them back the mop. I found Leo in the kitchen, a mug of coffee waiting for me. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. "What do you want to do?" he asked, no judgment in his voice, only support. "I want to watch them burn," I said, and the ferocity in my own voice surprised me. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice in my veins. "Not literally," I added, managing a grim smile. "I want to expose them. I want to hold up a mirror so they are forced to see the ugly, greedy people they are. I want them to know that I know. Everything." We spent the next few hours talking, not just as a couple, but as strategists planning a campaign. This couldn't be a messy, screaming fight. That was their territory. They were experts in circular arguments and emotional manipulation. A shouting match would only allow them to paint me as the hysterical, ungrateful daughter. No, this had to be precise. It had to be a surgical strike, executed with calm and irrefutable evidence. The plan began to take shape. It was audacious, theatrical, and deeply satisfying. "We need to go back," I said. "We need to arrange another dinner. A proper celebration, just like Mom wanted." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. "But this time we're not hiding anything. This time I'm wearing my ring. Leo's new ring. The beautiful, perfect replica he had designed for me. He had told me the story behind it after the revelation of the screenshot. Knowing how devastated I was by the loss of the original, he had spent months working with a jeweler, using the few photos I had to create an exact copy. It was a gesture of such profound love and understanding that it brought tears to my eyes. And now, it would be our secret weapon. "They'll recognize it," Leo said, thinking through the logistics. "Or they'll think it's the original." "Exactly," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "Let them. Let my mother see it and believe her lie has miraculously come true. Let her think she's been absolved. We'll let them walk right into the trap. We'll let them build the cage of lies around themselves, bar by bar, and then, when they're comfortable and feeling safe, we'll present them with the evidence of what they really did. And we will lock the door." The transition from passive victim to active protagonist was intoxicating. I felt a surge of power I hadn't realized I was missing my entire life. I was no longer reacting to their chaos. I was creating the terms of engagement. For years, they had controlled the narrative, casting me in whatever role suited their needs. Now, I was taking back the pen. I was going to write the final chapter of this story myself. With the plan set, I picked up my phone to make the call. My finger hovered over my mother's contact information, a familiar wave of preemptive exhaustion washing over me. For years, calling her was a chore, a necessary act of maintenance for a relationship that felt increasingly one-sided. This time, however, it was different. I wasn't calling out of obligation. I was calling as a predator setting a snare. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and pressed the button. She answered on the second ring, her voice a little too bright, a little too eager. "Nikki, I was just thinking about you." I almost laughed. Of course she was. She was likely strategizing with Mara about how to handle the situation of my mysterious, ringless engagement. "Hi, Mom," I said, injecting a note of sheepish apology into my voice. "Listen, I'm sorry if we seemed a little off last night. It was a lot to take in, and I think we were both just overwhelmed." "Oh, of course, sweetie," she cooed, swallowing the bait whole. "We understand completely. We're just so thrilled for you. Well, to make up for it, we were hoping we could treat you all to a proper celebration dinner this weekend. Our treat. We'll come over on Saturday, maybe bring some nice steaks for the grill." The offer of free food was the second part of the lure, and she snapped it up immediately. "Oh, Nikki, you don't have to do that. But it sounds wonderful. It will be so lovely to have a real celebration. We were so worried about you." The fake concern was so thick I could feel it clogging the phone line. "Great," I said. "And Mom, I have good news. I got my ring back from the jeweler today. The resizing is perfect." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the cogs turning in her head, the relief and excitement flooding her system. The missing piece of the puzzle had been found. The asset had been secured. "Oh, that's wonderful news," she gushed, her voice now genuinely enthusiastic. "I can't wait to see it. We all can't. Saturday will be perfect. We'll see you then." I hung up the phone and looked at Leo, a grim sense of triumph on my face. "The trap is set," I said. The next few days were spent in quiet preparation. Leo and I were a team, united in our purpose. We went over the plan again and again, anticipating their every move, their every likely lie and deflection. We compiled the evidence, the screenshot of Mara, the timeline of her car purchase, and I even went back through my old bank statements, highlighting the numerous cash transfers I had sent to my parents and sister over the years, a stark financial record of their dependency. Each highlighted line was a small vindication, a piece of proof that I was not, in fact, dramatic or sensitive. I was being used. On Saturday afternoon, we went to the butcher shop and bought the best cuts of steak, a bottle of expensive wine, and a fancy dessert. The optics had to be perfect. We were coming as the happy, successful, generous couple, lulling them into a false sense of security. As I got ready that evening, I paused in front of the mirror. I slid the beautiful replica ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt like a piece of armor, a talisman of the strength I was about to need. I looked at my own reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the dutiful daughter or the long-suffering sister. I saw a woman on the verge of liberation. The drive to their house was the polar opposite of our last trip. There was no tension, no dread. There was only a calm, focused sense of purpose. We were not lambs walking to the slaughter. We were hunters. The moment we walked through the door, the difference in atmosphere was palpable. The strained politeness from our last visit was gone, replaced by an effusive, almost manic warmth. My mother hugged me tightly, her eyes immediately darting down to my left hand. The sight of the ring, glittering under the hallway light, made her gasp. "Oh, Nikki, it's breathtaking. It's even more beautiful than I remember." She grabbed my hand, pulling it towards my father and sister. "Tom, Mara, come look, she has the ring." My father ambled over, giving it a cursory glance, and a non-committal, "Very nice." But Mara's reaction was a study in concealed panic. Her eyes widened, her face paled slightly, and she shot a terrified, questioning look at my mother. It was a fleeting expression, quickly masked by a forced smile, but I saw it. Leo saw it too. "Wow, Nikki," Mara said, her voice a little too high. "It's huge." She couldn't bring herself to look at it for more than a second. The evening proceeded with the same cloying energy. My mother couldn't stop talking about the ring, asking questions about the proposal, about our wedding plans. She was practically vibrating with excitement. It was the performance of her life. She was the proud mother of the newly engaged daughter, a role she played with Emmy-worthy conviction. We sat down to dinner, the steaks cooked to perfection, the wine flowing. The conversation was all about the future, about how wonderful it was that I had found such a successful, stable man in Leo. They talked about potential wedding venues, about guest lists, about the kind of dress I should wear. It was a conversation I had always dreamed of having with my family, but now it felt utterly grotesque. Every word was a lie, built on a foundation of theft and deceit. I played my part, smiling and nodding, letting them dig their own graves with every enthusiastic comment. I kept my left hand visible on the table, the ring, a constant, silent accusation that only Mara and my mother seemed to understand. Leo was magnificent. He was charming and attentive, answering my father's questions about the tech industry, complimenting my mother's side dishes, and even managing to draw Mara into a conversation about her job. He was lulling them into a state of absolute security, making them believe they had gotten away with everything, that their comfortable world was about to be upgraded through their connection to him. The climax arrived with dessert. My mother brought out the tiramisu I had bought, dishing it out onto plates. "This is just the perfect evening," she said with a contented sigh, taking a seat. A beautiful dinner to celebrate my beautiful daughter and her incredible ring. That was my cue. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my dessert, savoring the moment. Then I placed my fork down, folded my hands on the table, and looked directly at my mother. Her smile was beatific, her eyes shining with triumph. "I'm so glad you like the ring, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Leo had it made for me." The silence that fell over the dinner table was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that follows a loud explosion. My mother's smile froze on her face, the joyful expression cracking like cheap porcelain. My father looked from me to my mother, his brow furrowed in confusion. And Mara, who had been staring at her phone, slowly lifted her head, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "What? What did you say?" My mother stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The colour was draining from her face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. "I said, Leo had this ring made for me," I repeated, enunciating each word with chilling clarity. I held up my hand, turning it slightly so the facets of the sapphire caught the light. "It's a replica. He designed it based on old photographs because he knew how much Grandma Eleanor's ring meant to me. The one you told me was lost." I let the last word hang in the air, a poisoned dart. My mother just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. The gears of her mind were grinding, trying to process this new information, trying to find an escape route from the corner I had just backed her into. She had been so sure, so confident in her deception. My having the ring was the one scenario she hadn't planned for, and in her arrogance, she had walked right into the kill zone. It was she who had brought it up again and again all night, she who had praised its beauty, she who had anchored the entire evening's celebration to its presence on my finger. She had built my gallows, and I was now inviting her to the hanging. My father was the first to break the spell. "A replica? What are you talking about, Nikki? Why would he do that?" "Because the real one was stolen, Dad," I said, my gaze never leaving my mother's face. Or at least that's the story I was told. My mother finally found her voice, and she came out swinging, reverting to her most practiced defense mechanism, righteous indignation. "What are you implying?" she said, her voice trembling with manufactured rage. "Are you accusing me of something? After all I've done for you? How dare you come into my house? And where is the ring, Mom?" I cut her off, my voice still quiet, still calm. The contrast between her screeching and my stillness was stark, and it gave me all the power. What happened to the ring my grandmother left for me in her will? The direct question, devoid of accusation but heavy with implication, seemed to suck the remaining air from her lungs. She looked wildly around the table, her eyes landing on Mara, a silent, desperate plea for backup. Mara looked like she was about to be physically ill. She wouldn't meet my mother's gaze. She wouldn't meet mine. She just stared at her dessert, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. My mother was alone. The architect of this entire lie was completely and utterly on her own, and she knew it. The trap had snapped shut. My mother, a cornered animal, did the only thing she knew how to do. She started building a new lie on the ruins of the old one. It was a frantic, desperate piece of improvisation, and it was pathetic to watch. Found, she suddenly exclaimed, her voice shrill. That's it. You found it. Oh, Nikki, I'm so relieved. She clasped her hands together, a look of beatific wonder on her face. I must have packed it away by mistake all those years ago. You know how chaotic it was after your grandmother passed. It must have ended up in one of your old boxes from your childhood room. I probably moved it myself and completely forgot. Oh, thank heavens it's safe. She beamed at me, expecting me to accept this new, ridiculous narrative, to be grateful for her fabricated relief. She was trying to rewrite history in real time, to gaslight me into believing that this was all a simple, heartwarming misunderstanding. She was counting on my lifelong habit of capitulation, my ingrained desire to smooth things over and avoid conflict. She was expecting the old Nikki. The old Nikki was not home. I just stared at her, my expression unreadable. I let her absurd story hang in the air, letting its own ridiculousness suffocate it. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just waited. The silence stretched on, becoming more and more uncomfortable for her. Her smile began to falter, the mask of relieved mother slipping to reveal the panicked liar underneath. Isn't that wonderful, Tom? She said, turning to my father for support. The ring is found. My father, ever the bystander, just looked confused. But Nikki just said it was a replica. She's joking, my mother insisted, her laugh high and brittle. She's just pulling our leg. It's her sense of humor. You know how she is, always so dramatic. She was trying to paint me as the villain, the cruel daughter playing a sick joke on her loving family. It was a classic move, one she had used on me 100 times before. Any time I expressed a valid negative emotion, I was being dramatic. Any time I pointed out an injustice, I was being sensitive. My feelings were not valid data. They were an inconvenient malfunction. Mara, seeing an escape hatch, tried to jump on board. Yeah, Nikki, that's not funny, she mumbled, still not looking at me. You really had us going there. They were trying to team up, to create a shared reality where I was the unstable one, the one causing all this unnecessary trouble. But their alliance was weak, born of desperation. They had no idea what was coming next. Their frantic attempts to patch the gaping hole in their story were pitiful. They were so used to me backing down, so confident in their ability to manipulate me, that they couldn't comprehend a scenario where I had actual proof. They still thought this was a battle of wills, a contest of he said, she said. They were about to find out that I had brought a cannon to a knife fight. I let the silence hang for another long moment, watching my mother's frantic eyes and my sister's panicked stillness. I had given them every opportunity to come clean. I had presented them with a scenario, the ring is a replica, that offered them a potential off-ramp, a chance to express confusion, and maybe, just maybe, begin to tell the truth. Instead, they had chosen to double down, to build a more elaborate, more insulting lie right in front of my face. They had chosen their path. Now I would choose mine. I slowly reached into my purse, which I had set on the floor beside my chair. I pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and navigated to the photo gallery. I placed the phone on the center of the table and slid it across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of my sister. On the screen was the screenshot. Mara, in Las Vegas, smiling with my grandmother's ring on her finger. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. I'm not joking. This is a replica, because the real one was on Mara's hand 3 years ago. Mara flinched as if I had struck her. She stared at the phone, her face crumpling. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking ghostly under the warm dining room lights. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the screen. A small, strangled sound escaped her lips. She looked from the phone to Mara, then to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Not disbelief at the lie, but disbelief that I had found it out. My father picked up the phone. He stared at the picture for a long time. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "That's Grandma Eleanor's ring." "Yes, it is," I said, "and that's Mara, wearing it in a club." The caption, which she later deleted, said, "Vegas baby, big wins all around." This was taken about 8 weeks before she bought her new SUV. Funny how that works, isn't it? I turned my full attention to my sister, who was now visibly trembling. "So, Mara, why don't you tell us? How did you get Grandma's ring?" The ring that was lost, the ring that my mother swore up and down had vanished from her house. "I'm dying to hear this story." Mara looked at my mother, her eyes pleading for a rescue that wasn't coming. My mother was completely frozen, her carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. The evidence was irrefutable. It was right there, in full color, on a 5-inch screen. There was no room to maneuver, no space to concoct another lie. The truth had finally cornered them, and it was demanding to be heard. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. For my entire life, I had been the one on the defensive, the one explaining, justifying, and pleading. Now, they were the ones squirming under the hot lights of scrutiny, and I was the one in control. It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment. It was a grim, hollow sense of vindication. I hadn't wanted it to be true, but now that it was confirmed, I was determined to see it through to the end. The explosion, when it came, was not directed at me. It was an internal detonation, the family turning on itself like a pack of starving wolves. My mother, recovering from her initial shock, turned her fury not on herself for her lies, or on me for exposing them, but on Mara for getting caught. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What did you do?" Mara finally broke. Sobs racked her body, great, gulping, theatrical sobs that had always been her get-out-of-jail-free card. "I'm sorry," she cried, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to, I was desperate. I needed the money for the car down payment, and you said—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The accusation hung in the air. "I said what?" my mother snarled, her eyes narrowing. "What did I say?" "You said Nikki didn't need it," Mara wailed. "You said she'd just put it in a box and forget about it. You said Grandma would have wanted me to have it, to be happy. You told me to take it." The confession was out, ugly and undeniable. My mother hadn't just allowed the theft, she had instigated it. She had provided the moral justification, twisting our grandmother's memory into a cudgel to serve her own selfish agenda. My father, who had been silent until now, finally seemed to grasp the enormity of what had happened. He looked at my mother, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning disgust. "Sarah, is that true? You told her to take the ring?" My mother's head snapped towards him, her expression turning vicious. "Oh, don't you dare take the high ground, Tom. Don't you dare. You knew we were struggling. You knew Mara needed that car for her job. Where were you when the bills were piling up? Sitting in your precious armchair watching TV. You never lift a finger to help. This is your fault too." It was a masterclass in deflection. In the space of 30 seconds, she had implicated Mara, then blamed my father, all while positioning herself as the put-upon matriarch, trying to hold the family together by any means necessary. It was breathtaking in its audacity. The argument devolved into a torrent of shouted accusations and recriminations. Years of unspoken resentments and financial grievances came pouring out. My sister's irresponsible spending, my father's passive indifference, my mother's manipulative control. It was all laid bare on the dining room table, uglier and more rotten than the half-eaten dessert. Leo and I just sat there, silent witnesses to the family's self-immolation. We didn't need to say another word. I had lit the fuse, and now I was simply watching the controlled demolition. They were doing my work for me, exposing the rot at the core of their relationships, a rot that I had spent my life trying to paper over. I felt strangely detached, like watching a movie whose ending I already knew. There was no satisfaction in their pain, only a profound and weary sadness. This was my family, and it was a sham. The whole thing, my entire childhood, my entire identity as a daughter and a sister, it was all based on a lie. The love was conditional, the support was a transaction, and loyalty was a weapon to be used against anyone who rocked the boat. I looked at Leo, and he met my gaze with a look of quiet, unwavering support. He was my family now. This chaotic, screaming, blame-shifting mess in front of me was just a collection of people I used to know. As the storm of accusations raged around us, Leo calmly placed his napkin on the table. He stood up, and his quiet movement was enough to momentarily halt the screaming match. All three of them turned to look at him, their faces flushed with anger and shame. "I think we've heard enough," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. It was the calm authority in his tone that cut through their hysteria. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't judging, he was simply stating a fact. He then looked directly at my mother. "Sarah," he began, "for years you have used Nikki as your financial and emotional safety net. You've taken advantage of her good nature, her sense of duty, and her love for this family. You've taught Mara that her actions have no consequences because Nikki will always be there to clean up the mess." He then turned to my father. "Tom, you've stood by and watched it happen. Your silence makes you just as complicit. You've enjoyed the peace that Nikki's sacrifices have brought you without ever once stepping in to defend her." Finally, he looked at Mara, whose sobs had subsided into pathetic sniffles. "And you," he said, his voice laced with a subtle note of pity. "You've let them turn you into this. Someone who would steal from her own sister, from her own grandmother's memory, and feel entitled to do it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table. It was a printed summary of the bank statements, the list of cash transfers I had given him. "This is a record of the last 5 years," he said. "It shows that Nikki has given this family over $30,000. Money she was told were loans, money she was saving for a down payment on a house, money she worked hard for, while the rest of you treated her like a personal ATM." My father flinched. My mother stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "That's not including the bills she's paid, the groceries she's bought, the emotional labor she has performed, free of charge for her entire life," Leo continued. "The engagement ring that Mara sold probably netted her, what, a few $1,000s, a fraction of what Nikki has given you. The difference is, Nikki gave it willingly, out of a misguided sense of love. You stole it, out of a sense of pure entitlement." He had laid out the entire ugly truth of our family dynamic with the precision of a prosecuting attorney. He presented the facts, stripped of emotion, and they were damning. There was nothing left for them to say. They had no defense. Their lies were exposed, their manipulations laid bare, their selfish motives revealed for all to see. They were morally and emotionally bankrupt. The great performance was over, the curtain had fallen, and the actors were left standing on a bare stage, their cheap costumes and painted smiles no longer able to hide the truth. With the final, damning piece of evidence lying on the table between us, I knew it was time. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to reveal. The truth, in all its ugly glory, was out. I stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound on the hardwood floor. The movement seemed to break the spell that held my family captive. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. Perhaps they thought I would fix this. Perhaps they thought I would smooth it all over, forgive them, and we could all pretend this horrible evening never happened. That was, after all, my designated role. "We're leaving," I said, my voice steady. I looked at each of them in turn, making sure they understood the finality of my words. I started with my father. "I'm done being invisible to you." I moved to my sister. "I'm done cleaning up your messes." And finally, I looked at my mother, the architect of my pain. "And I'm done being your scapegoat, your bank, and your therapist. I'm just done." My mother's face crumpled, and she switched tactics from rage to pleading. "Nikki, please," she whimpered, reaching a hand out to me. "Don't do this. We're family. We can work this out." The word family was so obscene coming from her lips at that moment that I almost laughed. "No," I said, the single word a steel door slamming shut. "No, we can't. Family doesn't do this. Family doesn't steal from their dead. Family doesn't build relationships on a foundation of lies and exploitation. Whatever this is, I said, gesturing to the three of them, it's not a family. It's a hostage situation, and I am finally setting myself free. Leo came to my side, placing a supportive hand on my back. We walked towards the front door, the silence behind us a testament to their shock. They truly hadn't believed I would ever leave. They had taken my presence for granted, assuming my loyalty was unconditional, an infinite resource they could tap into forever. As I reached for the doorknob, Mara's voice, small and broken, called out from the dining room. "Nikki, wait." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really am sorry." I paused for a moment, considering her apology. It was the first one I had heard from her in my entire life, but it was too little, too late. An apology is not a magical eraser. It doesn't undo years of calculated selfishness. It doesn't restore trust that has been systematically demolished. "I know," I said, my hand on the door. It was the most honest thing I could say. I did believe that in that moment, she was sorry. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry her comfortable life was imploding. Whether she was sorry for the actual act, for the pain she had caused me, was another question entirely, one I no longer had the energy to explore. "Goodbye," I said to the closed door in front of me. And then Leo and I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind us. The door clicked shut, and with that sound, a lifetime of obligation and resentment fell from my shoulders. I was free. The days that followed our departure were a strange mixture of deafening silence and chaotic noise. The initial silence was a blessing. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in years. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for as long as I could remember was gone. There was no need to check my phone for a crisis text, no feeling of dread about an impending phone call demanding money or emotional support. The quiet was profound. It was the sound of my own life, uninterrupted, but the silence didn't last. After 3 days, the barrage began. It started with my mother. A string of text messages, each one a masterclass in emotional whiplash. The first was filled with rage. "I cannot believe you would be so cruel as to air our private business in front of Leo. You have shamed this family." An hour later, it was followed by desperate pleading. "Nikki, please call me. I can't eat. I can't sleep. You're tearing me apart." Then came the love bombing. "I was just looking at your baby pictures. You were such a sweet girl. I love you more than anything. Let's not let this silly argument ruin everything." Each message was a carefully crafted hook, designed to snag my guilt, my pity, or my nostalgia. I read them, recognized them for the manipulative tools they were, and deleted them without responding. Mara's attempts were less sophisticated. Her texts were just a series of frantic apologies and promises to pay me back for the ring, a promise that was as empty as her bank account. "I'm so sorry, Nikki. I'll get the money, I swear. Please don't hate me. You're my only sister." Then my father, who had probably never willingly sent a text message in his life, chimed in, clearly at my mother's behest. His message was short and clumsy. "Your mother is very upset. You should call her." They were trying to pull me back into the old dynamic, to triangulate and create a pincer movement of guilt. They couldn't conceive of a world where their tactics no longer worked. They had lost control of the narrative, and it was driving them insane. Leo was my rock through it all. He'd take my phone, read the messages, and just say, "Delete," his voice, a calm anchor in my emotional storm. He reminded me that their feelings were not my responsibility. Their crisis was a consequence of their own actions, not my fault for exposing them. "They're not upset that they hurt you," he said one evening, as I stared at yet another pleading text from my mother. "They're upset that you're not letting them get away with it anymore." He was right. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about re-establishing control. After a week of unanswered texts, the phone calls started. I would see their names flash on the screen and my stomach would clench with the old, familiar dread. But instead of answering, I would take a deep breath and press the decline button. Each rejected call felt like a small victory, a reinforcement of the new boundary I had set. Finally, after 2 weeks of this relentless campaign, I did the one thing I never thought I would have the strength to do. I opened their contact information, and one by one I pressed block. The finality of the act was terrifying and exhilarating. The line was cut. They could no longer reach me. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a temporary reprieve. It was a permanent state. It was peace. With my family blocked and their noise silenced, my world began to expand in ways I hadn't anticipated. The mental and emotional energy I had spent managing their lives was now mine to reinvest in my own. It was like I'd been carrying a massive, invisible weight for my entire life, and now that it was gone, I felt almost dizzy with the freedom. Leo and I started planning our wedding in earnest. Before, the thought of it had been tinged with anxiety. Who would I invite? How would my mother try to control everything? Would Mara make a scene? Now, those questions were moot. The guest list became a joyful exercise in choosing the people who genuinely loved and supported us, our chosen family of friends who had been there through thick and thin. We decided on a small ceremony at the same cliffside where he had proposed, followed by a casual reception at our favorite restaurant. There would be no seating charts designed to avoid conflict, no dramatic speeches, no pressure to perform for anyone. It would be a day about our love and nothing else. I found myself rediscovering old hobbies I had abandoned because I was always too busy, which really meant I was too busy solving someone else's problems. I started painting again, setting up an easel in the corner of our living room. I went on long hikes, Leo by my side, reveling in the quiet beauty of nature. The peace I was cultivating was not just an absence of drama, it was the presence of joy. I started going to therapy, something I had resisted for years because my mother had always insisted that we don't air our dirty laundry to strangers. My therapist helped me unpack the complex grief of losing a family, not to death, but to truth. She helped me see that the family I was mourning had never really existed. It was an ideal I had desperately tried to project onto a group of deeply dysfunctional people. It was hard work. There were days when a wave of sadness would hit me, a pang of loss for the mother or sister I wished I had. But the sadness was clean, unburdened by the anger and resentment that had clouded my life for so long. It was a healthy grief, a necessary step in the healing process. My relationship with Leo deepened. We had always been strong, but going through this fire together had forged an unbreakable bond between us. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and had not tried to save me, but had instead empowered me to save myself. He loved the woman I was becoming, the one who was no longer afraid to say no, the one who valued her own peace above all else. Life was quiet, it was simple, and it was beautiful. The drama I had mistaken for love had been replaced by a steady, unwavering partnership and the quiet hum of a life lived on my own terms. I was finally, truly happy. Just when I started to believe that they had finally gotten the message, they made one last, desperate attempt to breach the walls of my new life. It was a Tuesday evening. Leo and I were cooking dinner together, music playing softly in the background, the apartment filled with the smell of garlic and basil. It was a perfect, ordinary night. Then, the intercom buzzed. We looked at each other, confused. We weren't expecting anyone. Leo went to answer it, his brow furrowed. "Hello?" he said. A voice crackled through the speaker, a voice I would recognize anywhere. It was my mother. "Leo, it's Sarah. Please, let us in. We just want to talk to Nikki." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, a wooden spoon dripping tomato sauce onto the floor. They were here, on my doorstep. They had crossed the final boundary. Leo looked at me, his expression calm but his eyes asking a clear question. "What do you want to do?" The old Nikki would have panicked. She would have let them in to avoid a scene. She would have listened to their excuses and their pleas, and the cycle would have started all over again. But the old Nikki was gone. I walked over to the intercom, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I took a deep breath and pressed the talk button. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice clear and steady. There was a pause on the other end, and then my mother's voice came again, laced with a familiar, cloying sweetness. "Nikki, honey, don't be like this. We miss you. We love you. We've driven all the way here just to see you." "You shouldn't have," I said. "You're not welcome here." The words felt harsh, but they were necessary. They were the truth. "Please, Nikki." a new voice chimed in, weaker and shakier. It was Mara. "Just give us 5 minutes." "No," I said. My voice didn't waver. "This is my home. You are not welcome in it. I have asked you to leave me alone. If you do not leave the premises now, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing and harassment." The silence on the other end of the intercom was long and heavy. I could picture them on the sidewalk, my mother's face contorted in disbelief, my sister crying, my father standing awkwardly to the side. They had played their final card, the unannounced ambush, and it had failed. They had no more moves left to make. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice stripped of all its warmth, leaving only a core of bitter, venomous rage. "You will regret this, Nikki. One day you'll need your family, and we won't be there for you." It was her last curse, her final attempt to instill fear in me. But it had no power over me anymore. "I'm counting on it," I said. I released the button and turned away from the intercom. Leo wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. We stood there for a few minutes, listening. We heard the sound of car doors slamming and an engine starting. Then silence. They were gone. It was truly, finally, over. The incident at the intercom was the final severing. It was the moment I realized that the invisible cord that had tied me to them for my entire life had not just been cut, but had dissolved into dust. Their final threat, that one day I would need them, and they wouldn't be there, was meant to be a terrifying prophecy. Instead, it was a promise of the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. In the months that followed, a profound sense of calm settled over my life. The hypervigilance I had lived with for so long faded away. I no longer braced myself for the next manufactured crisis or emotional ambush. The space they had occupied in my head, a space filled with worry, resentment, and a desperate, unfulfilled longing for approval, was now free. I filled it with wedding plans, with painting, with laughter, with quiet evenings with Leo, with building a future that was entirely our own. We got married on a beautiful, sunny afternoon on the cliffside, overlooking the ocean. It was a small ceremony, attended by a handful of our closest friends. I didn't have a father to walk me down the aisle, so Leo and I walked down together, hand in hand, partners from the very beginning. There was no family drama, no passive-aggressive comments, no one trying to make the day about themselves. There was only love and joy and the overwhelming feeling of rightness. I had chosen my family, and my family was there to celebrate with me. My friends, who had watched my struggle for years, saw the change in me. "You seem lighter," one of them said, hugging me after the ceremony. "Like you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying." She was right. I had put down the weight of their expectations, their manipulations, and their conditional love. I had chosen to save myself, and in doing so, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The replica ring that Leo had given me, the catalyst for this entire revolution, glittered on my finger. It was more precious to me than the original ever could have been. The original was a symbol of a legacy they had tried to steal. My ring was a symbol of a future we were building together, a future based on truth, respect, and a love that was real and unconditional. It was a testament to the man who loved me enough to show me a difficult truth, and who stood by me as I chose to face it. It wasn't just a replica of a ring, it was a symbol of a replicated life, a new life built on a better, stronger foundation. Looking back, the journey from that tense car ride to this peaceful present feels both impossibly long and incredibly swift. Breaking free from a dysfunctional family system is not a single event, but a war of attrition. It's a series of small battles, of blocking a number, of not answering a door, of choosing your own peace over their manufactured chaos. It's a process of unlearning a lifetime of programming that tells you that family is an obligation you must bear, no matter the cost to your own well-being. The woman who reluctantly took off her engagement ring in her fiancé's car is a stranger to me now. I remember her fear, her confusion, her ingrained habit of prioritizing her family's comfort over her own intuition. I feel a great deal of sympathy for her. She had been trained her entire life to accept the unacceptable, to call manipulation love and abuse family. The greatest gift Leo ever gave me was not the ring itself, but the clarity to see the truth. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply held up a mirror and gave me the courage to look at my own reflection and the reflection of the people around me without flinching. The loss of my family is a strange kind of grief. It's not the sharp pain of a sudden death, but the dull ache of an amputation. I had to cut off a part of myself, a part of my history, in order to survive. There are moments, rare but real, when I feel a phantom limb, a memory of a shared laugh or a holiday tradition, and I feel a pang of sadness for what could have been. But then the feeling passes, and it is replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life I have now, a life that is authentically mine. I built this peace. I fought for this quiet. I earned this happiness. They say that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I don't hate my parents or my sister. I simply do not think about them. They are characters in a story from a book I have already finished reading. Their power over me is gone. My life is my own, my joy is my own, and my future is unwritten, free from their toxic ink. The hardest decision of my life was also the most liberating. It was the choice to stop setting myself on fire to keep them warm. So now I ask you, the people who have listened to my story, was cutting them off completely going too far, or was it the only real choice I had?